Welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod, where every week we dive into a different practice, a different perspective on life, and you come along to try it with us. Join us on Substack at mindbodpod.com to watch this episode as a video podcast. And if you want to support our crazy adventures and get fun perks like our weekly after party videos, consider becoming a paid subscriber. And now, on to this week's adventure.
Cara Lai, welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod. We're very happy to have you here.
Thanks. I am happy to be here. I
Good.
feel honored to be invited.
So we had a bit of an email exchange exploring a possible topic and practice for this episode, and I'm very excited. We kind of landed on something that maybe doesn't get spoken enough about and is very relevant to our contemporary situation. So maybe I'll let you share a little bit about where you wanted to go with us today, and then even just say a little bit about yourself, like, you know, where you teach or how your tradition and that kind of thing.
Okay, I guess I'll start with the latter.
Mhm.
Can I do that?
Yes, please.
I am a Dharma teacher, former psychotherapist, former person who likes to hike with children in the woods, former artist, still an artist, actually.
No more
And-
hiking kids
Yeah, I
in the
was
woods,
gonna say,
though. For that,
Still at heart does not travel with children.
Oh, actually, now I have a baby, so there's hiking in the woods with a baby.
On
that
singular.
happens now. Yeah, one baby. Well, he's 1.5. So I'm a mom too, and most of what I do is traveling around and teaching meditation retreats, and I do a lot of teaching online too. I still love working with young people, so I teach teen retreats. And actually, Jeff, I've known about you and been in your orbit for a while because we both taught for Inward Bound Mindfulness Education.
and for
Um,
10% happier app.
And
we-
oh yeah, that
Oh.
place. 10% Happier is a
and
place
you
I
do a
like.
podcast on parenting with JMO, or our mutual friend.
Yes, which is super fun and not as stressful as this podcast currently is for me because you guys feel like you're famous to me. I don't know why. You're probably not that famous, but you're definitely more famous than me.
Like Q-list celebrity we're talking here.
Yeah, we're like sub famous.
Yeah, somewhere between Q and Z.
Yeah. But not that it's like actually a fun or cool thing to be famous in like actual experience, because I feel like that would be really horrible if everyone could recognize me wherever I went. So I don't want to be famous, but I'm nervous to be on your
Noted.
podcast 'cause
We will do everything we can to make sure that
Make this the most private episode that we
no
have.
no fame follows.
yeah, so I guess that's me in a nutshell. And what's been alive for me right now is I've just noticed how, okay, there's just a lot going on in the world as usual, and it's very volatile, and there's war and there's a lot of suffering. There are many, many conflicts. I think there's like 32 armed conflicts in the world. And every time I go on social media, there's just a lot of people just saying everything that they feel and a lot of anger coming from social activists. And I had my own reaction to that and questions too about the main question is how can we approach suffering and war and turmoil like that from a place of love and not from a place of fear or anger or shaming, which I think is what we tend to do. And everybody has heard what I just said before, you know, like we all know that love is what heals, or at least we might intellectually know that, or we've probably heard that before. But it's one thing to know it intellectually. It's another thing to feel it and like really be trying to live into that and practice it. And it's hard, you know, obviously it's hard. Otherwise we would have an easy time getting along. And it's hard for me too. You know, it's a practice for me and I have my own edges with it. So I just wanted to talk about that and understand together how we can change the way that we approach pain and suffering so that the default isn't just adding more hatred to the problem. Did I do a good job of summarizing that?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, are you friends with Sebene? You know Sebene Selassie, my friend?
I know her and have met her, but we haven't really hung out.
She's the best.
before.
Her
I've
book is
heard.
great. You belong, and her book is very much preoccupied with this central thing, and it's the understanding that there's the simultaneous truth that we all share basic humanity and we all suffer. And so there's this way in which we're all the same or there's an overlap, but then we're also all different. And the ways in which we suffer are different. And the causes and roots of that suffering is different, even though there may be very root causes from a Buddhist point of view. And both of those things are true. And I think sometimes what can happen is people forget one or the other side of that.
Mhm.
People go too much on the one side. Human experience is challenging. We all suffer, and that's absolutely true. But then that can negate the specific ways in which people and populations and groups suffer that haven't been recognized. On the other hand, people can go on the other side and be too much about the specific ways in which the suffering happens and forget that there's another point of view, that there are other ways in which people are hurting and other everyone's potentially part of that. There's a lot more that could be part of that conversation. And so yeah, that's just kind of I see that. I don't know how you see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think about every day. I have the same experience on social media as you. And I mean, if you were ever on social media, you would know that it's a trash fire right now. Yeah, it's just like a lot of feelings bouncing around. And I think the core of the feelings are all really justified. And really what we're talking about is like, you have these feelings. What do you do with them? Right. And so I like to get in there with a kind of like a fine tooth comb, me personally, because I will wade in into the comment section, and I like to read what people are saying on social activist posts and stuff like that. And then I find there's like really two different kinds of comments. One that is shining light on the conflict and being a mouthpiece for people who are suffering. And then there's the kind that's like a lashing out that's like, I wish all these people would go to hell, or like, you should rot, like,
or I want to inflict pain on this person.
Yeah, retaliationary kinds of things, And I think the first one is really helpful, and I always think of, there's this kind of differentiation between peace and justice. It's like we're all trying to get like to a peaceful world, but the road to peace might look like justice seeking, which in the course of doing that, not everyone is happy and there couldn't be some strife, right? But if you come at it with a like, I am trying to heal my group of people or be there on behalf of another group of people, then I think you can get to that justice and then that eventual peace in a way that's, like you're saying, like that doesn't really take us through all the ignorance and all the personal suffering. But if you're going at that justice and then eventual peace from this retaliation standpoint, like what can heal there? There's no healing, So I very much agree with what both of you are saying. And I think it's so subtle that people in their anger, especially if you've never practiced with your anger, you're just blinded by it, right? It's just blind rage.
Yeah, to me, there's no problem with anger. It's important to express anger. That's exactly the appropriate response. The issue is it coming from your trauma underneath that? Like it's the traumatized part of you that wants to hurt. And so it's not your best self speaking when you're talking about hurting somebody. It's the part of you that's been hurt that's speaking. And so there's work around noticing where your activism is coming from. That's also seems to me to also be part of the conversation.
Yeah. And I think what got me kind of riled up about this enough to decide that this could be a good topic for the podcast was that every time I looked at social media or like I got an email that was, impressing upon Dharma teachers that they need to say this or do this, I felt attacked a little bit. And it was this situation where it's like, if you say something, you could get pounced on. And no matter what your intentions were, even if it's just, I just kind of want to understand and I have this question, you could get pounced on and attacked for not understanding that already, or for like using the wrong language, or for saying this but not that. And to me, it felt like the environment was not safe, obviously, but also like not conducive to me opening my heart to the suffering of the situation. It was like, actually, I know you're telling me that I should look more deeply at this suffering, but the way that I'm being told to do that is making me want to just look away and go somewhere else. And I know that's not your intention. So there must be a better way.
I mean, I really relate to it. And what it makes me think is I often have a feeling of deep sympathy for older generations. Like my parents were born in 1943 or something. And I remember when I was coming into political consciousness in the late, God, this is going to date me, in the late 80s, early 90s, the very heated discussions around our dinner table, where my mom would say, "Oh, this talking about like Eskimos." And I'd be like, "Mom, you can't say it's like it's Inuit. It's like you don't say that." But when she grew up, I mean, no doubt there was a ton of implicit racism in it, but she didn't know. She's this just like a clueless small town Canadian lady trying to do the best she can. And I would just be so all over her with these like harsh judgments and now I think it's still my job. That's kind of the job of the younger generation to try to educate and just try to show. I mean, in a way, it is the job of younger people because when you're older generation, you grew up in that water. You can't see the particulars of the way something is chafing or some injustice is happening, but a new generation who just emerges into it can really feel those touch points. It's like I feel like that is what the evolution of consciousness is. So there is a job for people who are sensitive to that to be able to speak it out. But to your point, can you do it in a way that's not going to make them suddenly close down? Because what would happen is if when I would be all over them, they just didn't want to then engage in a conversation. They didn't feel safe. And I understand that. And I think that does happen in the spaces that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts on that as well, because as a person who's on social media all the time, I see those same messages. There's this like contingent of people who are like, if you're not speaking out, you're part of the problem. And then there's people who are, I'm overwhelmed. I'm just going to do what I need to do, take care of myself. And if I'm going to be an activist, it's going to be offline and it's not your business. And I think a big thing for me is that there is no right way to act in those situations. And so to do what is the most natural to you, knowing that no matter what you choose, you're going to get pushback. If you don't speak out, you're going to get pushback. If you do speak out, you're going to get pushback. And it kind of actually comes back around to what we were joking about earlier, how you're saying like fame or being in the public eye is a double-edged sword. Like it's great in some ways and it's horrible in some ways. For me, I found that spending my entire life in the public eye, one of the positives of that is that every part of my life has at some point been public and open. People can comment on how you look or how you did or did not do your hair that day, and like completely petty stuff. And then into family stuff, like if they care to Google or whatever, or if they've been following me as an artist and whatever, that's all out there. And so early on, I had to go through this kind of process of becoming okay with that and not letting it sink into my own practice and my own daily life. And now as a Dharma teacher, it's helpful to me because I can say what I mean on social media. And there's people who show up. I post a lot of like pro-Palestinian things, and people will show up in my inbox being like, it's so nice to see a Dharma teacher taking a stance on this. And then sometimes people are like, don't you think that more people should? Don't you think more Dharma teachers should? And I'm like, that is completely their prerogative. I am willing to take both the heat and the whatever solidarity, but not everyone is. And that's totally okay. So
But also you feel like you have the resources to do that.
yeah.
There's so much to play here
Yeah.
because I think
Oh my
some
God.
people feel like they just do not have they're too vulnerable to be able to speak out in some way or
Yeah.
don't have the capacity. That's A. And then another point is just to say sometimes you have to be willing to be really uncomfortable when there's really messed up things happening in the world. Of course, it's going to be your discomfort is just a kind of tiny reflection of that initial trauma and that wound that's happening, and leaning into that may be the very thing that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of time it's like I could just speak for myself. Sometimes I feel so shut down and not sure what to say that I just freeze and don't say anything, and I don't know. And partly it's because I may be so out of my mind, stressed with intense mental health things are going on with me and my family, and I'm just like I'm not on social media. I don't have the capacity to respond to something. But it also might be that part of it is there's the fear there, or there's my own ignorance is operating there, and all those things that I bring to it are there, like and that I guess is also part of what we're saying here. Everyone's bringing everything to the table in these things, all their past, all their masks, and there's another point I wanted to say about that, but I'll let you guys.
Yeah, wow. This is like getting at the heart of what I'm interested in. And I have to admit that I don't have it like very clearly fleshed out in my mind exactly all these points. So I was looking forward to like teasing it apart with you both. And this is doing that for me. I feel like there's this thing that happens where people in places of power, spiritual teachers, get grilled about like, are you staying silent because it's comfortable for you or because it's actually something you've thought about and really considered as like what you're doing as your thing? Because it better not be the former. And basically, it feels like someone is telling me how I should be practicing. and telling me that I need to like stare directly into my blind spots and wrench my heart open before it's ready.
Mm.
And it just feels like there isn't any trust that I have my own process or that anyone could be trusted to find their path in their own way, and that we need to force each other's awakening to happen in order for the world to be okay. And it's so outside of our scope of control. We're trying to do other people's paths for them
Mhm.
instead
Mm.
of looking in our own front yard and seeing what's here that needs to be taken care of and tended to, and seeing that what we're doing and saying and the way we're acting is not coming from a wholesome place. It's actually coming from a place of fear.
Mhm.
And that is actually where we do have some control. And if we don't look first there, then what we're putting out into the world is actually only going to be adding to the problem. But I think that we somehow have gotten confused about the idea of going inward as being sort of like a cop out or an avoidance always. It's like what you do before you do something that actually is effective. And we don't see that as actually something impactful in and of itself. And I think that actually has something to do with American culture and patriarchy, actually. Like we prize this kind of doing, forceful energy, but we do not prize the more receptive, listening, yin kind of energy.
And I think you use the word trust, and I think that's a huge part of it. When we're being asked to live out loud and process out loud and make statements out loud, it's like, who is my audience there? If I don't trust you and if I'm not in relationship with you, I don't really owe you an explanation of, what my political beliefs are or any spiritual beliefs at all. And essentially that's what social media is asking you to do. It's asking you to get up on a pedestal and proclaim to the world, those people that you know and millions that you don't, what you stand for without in a sound bite without any explanation. And it's like, why would you feel safe? Like that's not a safe space. So I completely understand when people are like, social media cannot be my forum for this. I want to do it in my community. I want to do it in my friend group. And to me, it's like the question is twofold. For those people who are noticing the same thing and who want to change these habits, how can we change that? And then also, how can we operate in a world where most people are not interested in this change? Whether it's like having the resilience to put up with that or having skillful ways to redirect that or just protect yourself in that, because I think that's going to keep happening.
Yeah.
Keep thinking about two things. One is people are being hurt
Mhm.
and people are dying, and you can understand why there is an urgency around it.
Yeah,
Something
of course.
has to, it's like the need to do something is real and immediate and urgent. And I can see coming from another side, people saying like, you're not going to get time to get your stuff perfectly together when life hits like that. Certainly in a smaller way, the crisis is hitting my family. Like I just haven't had the time to get composed and be ready to give my best response to it. I'm in the middle of it, and in a sense, in the world, we're in the middle of it. So there's that. And then there's the piece around, I guess, what you were just saying, Carl, which is like how even activist culture reproduces some of the dominator culture tropes. And the idea that there's of othering, that there's a right perspective and there's a wrong perspective is something that I think a lot about, because I do think there's a more progressive and evolved perspective happening simultaneously as a perspective where everyone should be able to come to the table. You can't have true dialogue, you can't have true change if all you do is just say that person's the enemy, they're not allowed here. Then you're just reproducing the same dominator dynamic, and then even if it's the progressive one, it then was going to create an us and them. It's going to keep the tension alive, and we know this as teachers. So that's why I like that Sherry Mitchell book, Sacred Instruction. So much of it is about like how to actually have transform through conflict, how to actually do conflict well, how to have conversations that are really hard where you bring very different perspectives to the table and you try to find points of convergence. And the only way to do that is to welcome in to get below the mask to what people are really feeling and to create a safe space where everyone's allowed to talk about exactly what we're talking about. And that just does not happen.
Yeah. Wow. All of that. Yeah, the urgency thing when you were talking, it was like, yeah, this is a question I've been holding. And this is a question that people are gonna have. Like it's an emergency. We gotta do something and we can't wait for ourselves to be perfect before we do something. And I think about that a lot, especially when I'm hanging out with my toddler. It's like, well, I'm not gonna like wait until my heart is like pure to like pull him away from a truck that's gonna hit him. So like I think the solution, or like one way, is to just let ourselves be doing what we're doing and having our reactions. And we can keep posting on social media, and we can keep being who we are and responding the way we naturally or habitually are responding, but also start to add in a new kind of listening to our own hearts where possible. It's like you don't have to not act, but can you include how you're feeling and how your actions are impacting your heart, and include how you're feeling before, during, and after you do something about it, and let that be something that's held with compassion and interest, and let it inform what you decide to do, without saying like, well, because I'm doing that now, I have to like also start acting differently, but just making it more information to gather and use to start learning what it could look like to include more in our hearts. We start by including more of ourselves, and that leads to learning how to include other people who we don't feel like we've been able to include. So that's what I have to say about that.
I like the way you're working through this. It's fun. It's so refreshing not to have the potted answer.
Yeah.
This is the thing I say. I'll summarize paragraph 2 in my new book.
I do literally feel like I'm like coming up with this on the spot, which feels good. Like it feels like when you were talking about transforming through conflict, which I think you said you read in that book, transformation through conflict, like that actually woke my heart up when I heard you say that, because I think me, and so probably many people, have been feeling not like the conflict is like at all a good thing, but to call it transformation through conflict means that the whole conflict itself is an opportunity to learn how to include more in our hearts, to learn how to start erasing the lines that divide us and break the habit of just drawing more lines. And so maybe we can, I don't know if I want to use the word embrace, but maybe embrace. Yeah, I am going to use that word. That's a good word for this. We could embrace what's happening right now as actually something that could be incredibly conducive to a powerful change towards the good in the world, instead of viewing it like, well, we can't be okay until this is completely over and done with and just not happening anymore. It's happening. It is. And we're not going to just solve it overnight, but how can we use it to transform our hearts and minds, and the collective heart and mind, to be something that is much more resilient and powerful and loving?
Something that just came up for me as you're saying that is like, you're talking about how can we, let's say, for example, be activists and have it come from a place of open heart and inclusivity. And so I was thinking of movements that I currently follow or know of. And obviously, within those movements, there's people who are, like we said before, more about retaliating and othering and cancel culture. But a huge part of these activist movements are actually, especially like the young people, I feel like a lot of young people, it's really kind of like a soft, loving energy. Like if I go over to, the U of T encampment that's there right now around the corner, they're doing teach-ins and songs, and there's like a list where you can sign up to like make food for people. And I guess what I'm saying is it feels like a majority of that energy beating up against systems that are not interested in being heart forward or change or inclusivity, right? Let's talk about like, the conflict in Gaza right now. I have plenty of Jewish friends, lots of whom are from Israel, and I can acknowledge how difficult this is for them. I have friends who are Palestinian, and I know how difficult that is for them. I'm acting from a point, and we've talked about this many times before, of like the urgency. There's children dying, and I'm going to do what I can to make that stop. And I'm encountering a lot of other activists who are leading from that open-heartedness. But the systems that we're beating our heads up against are not interested in a conversation. They are the patriarchal kind of systems that are like, this is how it's done. This is how policing is done. This is how world affairs are done. There isn't like
Yeah.
this beautiful tribal exchange that is essentially what we're asking for. So I think when I'm seeing more negative things coming out of activist cultures, it's in response to that. It's like, okay, I've come with my best intentions and I've tried my best for months or years, or lifetimes, generations, and it just doesn't work. So then people are looking for, how do we escalate to like force justice so that we can get to peace afterwards? And I think in there lies the troublemaking, because people don't have guidance on how to do that well.
I see what you're
So
saying
yeah.
now.
And then
Yeah.
that's where like your anger, your trauma gets triggered, and then
Yeah.
you're not acting from the best place because you're not being met with a loving energy. So I guess what we're talking about is like how to continue that loving energy in the face of complete
That's why
brutality.
to me, practice is so. I mean, to me, it's like all you can do is all you can do.
Yeah.
Is what you can do, and try to do your best as possible to be coming from that more loving place. And you try to have a practice that supports you, and you hope that your model and the fact that this is getting into education and getting into school, and there's slowly also a grassroots shift, and like at some point the culture changed enough that there's less of that kind of overt dynamic happening. But it's going to be a process, and it's going to be massively imperfect, and there's going to be eruptions of trauma and anger, rage, and it's just like that. I don't know how it could be any other way, but I mean, that might be that helpful an answer, but like that's the kind of meta framing I find helpful for me, to just not be paralyzed in that. But there probably is more specific, actionable things that can be done within that.
Well, within practice, those moments where it's like, I'm open-hearted, I'm open-hearted, I'm open-hearted, okay, I'm done. I'm like, it's been way too long and nothing's happened. What happens there? Like what exactly internally for me? Because I'm very familiar with that. It's like all of a sudden, it's like I thought I was being patient, but now like all of a sudden I'm not. I'm done. I'm pissed. Like on the brink of tears. It just feels extremely painful. And I've just learned so much from being with myself in those moments. Like I suddenly feel this extreme sense of helplessness,
Yeah.
and I'm blaming myself for feeling helpless.
Mhm.
And that's what's painful for me, is when I'm blaming myself for being in this shitty situation. It's like not only does it suck, it's also my fault that it sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's super interesting. And it's been so helpful for me to see that, because it's not my fault. And the real pain is in believing that it's my fault and that I have control over this thing that is so much bigger than me, so much bigger than me. And I've really been able to hold myself and like, I don't know, that sounds corny, but really like, oh my God, Cara, it's not your fault. And you don't know what to do. If you knew what to do, you would do it. And you just don't. And it's okay. Like, it's okay to not know. It's okay to not have it figured out. Or, like, how would you know? Like, how would you have had the solution to this major global problem that's been going on for generations since the dawn of time? You just don't. And if it were that easy, you would have done it. And that for me has actually created the space to then be able to get curious about what's happening for other people, the people who I've considered to be the enemy. Like what's happening for them? Because if this is what's going on for me, and they're really like, I just have now all this space to look more closely at the situation that before I couldn't really look at before, because it actually brought up too much shame for me. Because if it's this stuck, then I must be really fucking things up. But now it's not my fault anymore. So now I can actually look and see what's going on from many different perspectives.
I think another thing too is we have the attachment to outcome. Every time we like get invested in anything, there's always this expectation of how it's going to turn out, right? And I think a part of what we're talking about too is like, okay, I'm going to do this stuff for the betterment of the world. And you have this internal timeline kind of for it, and nothing changes. And then suddenly, because of that attachment to, my activism or something is going to change something in a very short amount of time, and then it doesn't. And then suddenly this switch flicks and I'm angry now. And I feel like it's the same thing that happens in terms of like our ability to stay open-hearted with people who we think are opposed to us. It's like I have this expectation that I'm going to do good in my communications with you, and that's going to change you somehow. And then it doesn't change the person, and then we just go, the pendulum goes like this, and now I'm out for blood. So I feel like part of it too is like a relinquishing of attachment to outcome. I'm going to do what I think is right, and I don't know, whatever happens. I'm just going to continue on this path of doing what feels right, and that's hard. I think that's really hard. We're in an attachment to outcome society, essentially.
It's easy to like look around at the state of the world and be like, wow, what a shithole. But am I allowed to, like, swearing's
Yeah.
fine, right? Okay.
Totally.
Okay.
Sure.
This is good because I already did a bunch. Yeah, but there's so much that we are trying to do and succeeding at that's easy to forget, because we're just so fixated on what's wrong. And, fair enough, there's like a lot that's wrong, but there's a lot that's right too. And there's a lot of good in the world. And I truly think that everyone is trying their best to do what they think is right. Even the people that we think are doing horrendous things, they're trying to stand up for something good somewhere. And I think that's easy to forget. And then we create an enemy because we forget that. And actually, the practice that I was thinking about leading has something to do with this, because in Buddhism, ignorance is a word that gets used a lot. And I think, in regular non-Buddhist terminology, ignorance is something that we judge very heavily. And even actually in the Buddhist world, it's like people who are ignorant are seen as people who are refusing to look at problems because they have the luxury of not looking at problems because they're privileged. And that really got me thinking about privilege and what it really means to be privileged, because we think of privilege as, having a lot of money and power and like social status. But what is real privilege is something I asked myself a lot. Like, because we kind of like agreed a long time ago that money isn't everything, and that actually like we like studies show that like really wealthy people are just as unhappy as you are, or even worse. And so why do we center those things as like being privileged? So I think that actually privilege has something more to do with understanding where to find peace and happiness, and understanding what really leads to a liberated heart, understanding what really leads to lasting peace and happiness. So we need to stop expecting the people who are privileged to have what it takes to make real world transformation. We need to stop expecting our political leaders or the people with the most wealth and power to make big, lasting change in the world, because they simply do not have the resources that are needed to do that. They do not have that because there's too much ignorance there. What they have is ignorance. And that's not something that it makes any sense to judge them for, because ignorance in Buddhism is the root of all suffering. So it's the opposite actually of what's needed to liberate the heart and mind. That's what many of our great leaders have, is a lot of ignorance. And that's what we all have. And that's what we're all trying to work with and understand how to transform, at least, those of us who are on a spiritual path. And so I wanted to guide a practice about ignorance, and in using this concept of ignorance to look into our own hearts and to try to understand ignorance in ourselves, so that instead of looking at others who we deem ignorant with like judgment or fear, we can see ourselves in them and see the pain of ignorance.
Well, it's a perfect invitation. I think, especially because the conversation we had will have brought up lots of feelings, no doubt, and different kinds of feelings and thoughts. So that's kind of an opportunity to look at what's going on inside ourselves.
Yeah.
That we may not know about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you ready?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Just let yourself get comfortable and I don't know, let your guard down a little bit if possible and start to bring your attention inward. You might want to take a couple of deep breaths if that helps you get oriented around the present moment. So, our intention when we practice mindfulness meditation is to stay present however much we can. So, gathering some of this intention to stay present, we could find an object to focus on that helps us remember to come back. Maybe it's the breath, someplace in the body, or sound. And see if you can maintain some attention with this object as it moves and changes from moment to moment. And there will be, and probably already have been, times when we lose our connection with the present moment. So I'm going to invite you to start to get curious about what exactly goes on in the moment that you come back. What's the first thing you notice when you realize you've been lost? What is it that you're coming back to? Is it pleasant or unpleasant or something neutral? And you can also start to notice, where exactly were you when you were lost? And you don't have to go into remembering all the thoughts you had, but more getting a general sense of what that felt like to be not present. And what's the difference between being lost in thought or spaced out and being reconnected with the present moment? So as we keep reconnecting with our object of attention or whatever it is in the present that's helping us stay in the present, we could also start to pay attention to, what is it that makes us leave the present moment? Here we are noticing the breath or the sensations of the body or sound. And we might start to catch the moment right before we start to try and shift into thinking or fantasizing or planning or whatever our mind is doing. Is there something that you're not wanting to feel? What is it about this present moment that perhaps we feel like we can't bear? Maybe it's something about it just being hard to be alive in this constant bombardment of sensation. It's hard to be in a body that is always being stimulated, that's always feeling pain so sensitively, that's always being pulled around by pleasure and pain. It's hard to have a heart that's sensitive. So, of course, we want to escape. Of course, we need some way of finding solace. So, can we forgive ourselves for skipping off into somewhere else? And even give ourselves more permission to do that. Not that that's where we need to live or stay, because we know that that's not where transformation happens. But just understanding why we need to rest. Maybe we don't think that we can handle life. And so we try to find ways to leave it without ending it. Maybe we don't think that we have what we need to be fully present. But the more we turn again and again towards the present moment, the more we expand our window of tolerance and see that it is possible to be with what's difficult. And maybe the world is waiting for you to trust yourself enough to wake up, to trust yourself enough to stand up and share yourself with the world. Not because you need to change or be different, but because the world needs you. And so when you're ready, you can shift to a more outward orientation and start to open your eyes when you feel ready.
Something that came up for me while you were saying that, I was really trying to tune into what makes me leave or what that moment is like as I'm leaving the present. And I found it's at first it's physical for me. I'm like really relaxed. I'm in the present. I'm here, whatever's happening. There's aches and pains or whatever. My heart's pumping, breathing. And then there's this like slow tensing of my muscles that just is like the preamble to me being like into some other thought.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's just like I'm scrunching up and then I'm into a train of thought. So if I catch it on that wave of just tightening, and so, you were saying like, what is it that makes us want to leave? And at first in your example was maybe it's hard to stay. And so at first I was like, it's not hard to stay. It's almost like there's like this excitement. Like I'm excited about ideas. I'm excited to
Mm.
go into it. But then I was like, trying to get more and more minute. I'm like, why does it excite me and pull me away? And just staying with that, like, pre-thought physical tensing, I was like, that's pain. So like there's this like wave of pain in my body, and then I follow it, I ride it out into thought. It's rather than staying with it.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had such similar experiences because I love that invitation of that practice to get really clear about exactly that too. And I noticed something related, but a little different. And I'm curious to. It was actually interesting. It's funny because I'm a mindfulness teacher too, but I feel like you can't do this practice often enough. Like in terms of, there's always more insights. And so I had two. The first thing I noticed was I could feel some emotional, like reactivity in me still. Like when I say reactivity, I mean in response to that conversation we had, I kept seeing an image of Tasha, and what I was feeling was, did I support Tasha enough in some of the things she said? It was just that was, and then I was thinking about Cara. I was like, did I support Cara enough in the things? Did I get that right? This is a complicated subject that's very triggering, and maybe I just stumbled around like a dumb white guy and said a bunch of stupid shit. Like this, some of that I could feel the feelings of that, like in there, like oh, and then and then I could feel the pull of going into my head because my head wanted to problem solve it, to think about it, to problem solve it, to address the pain of that discomfort. But very quickly that kind of settled. If I just noticing that was there, I could feel all of it sort of settle, and I just was kind of in the moment. And then I was just with my breath and being a body, and just exactly like Tasha said. And then the invitation was, well, what then does pull you away? And I would sometimes get pulled away. But what I noticed was my attention goes to what's stimulating. My present body here, it feels comfortable, feels nice, but it's not exciting. But my this thought of like, oh, what's this? That's exciting. It has a higher register in my nervous system, and my attention is trained to go to the exciting thing. Oh, that's interesting. So I don't think I'm not going there because I was in pain here, although maybe I was. It was more like it wasn't stimulating enough. I want the next dopamine hit. I want the next thing. Maybe it's the same thing.
But is being bored a form of suffering?
I think it is.
Right? Like you're just kind of like,
it's not even bored. It's like I'm understimulated. I think the only reason I'm understimulated is because I have the contrast of having been totally overstimulated. What I've noticed from meditation is when you get through past that whole dynamic, the thing you notice is the thing that you would once have judged as boring is actually rich and deep and fulfilling and poignant. Of course, and that's coming to the other side of it. But I wasn't patient enough to stay with that because I'm inside the rinse cycle of my, conditioned mind.
Yeah, and I really feel what you're saying, Jeff, because my mind is that way too. Maybe all of our minds. It's like, oh, this is better. Oh, this is better. Oh, this is better. And it's like we don't so much notice that like this is better is only in contrast to this is worse. And like if you're with the this is worse for long enough, you're like, oh, I didn't think I could handle that. So I had to go to this is better. And I didn't think that I could handle that is something that's like,
I didn't think I needed to handle that.
That too, yeah, because I can just go to this. But the liberation of being able to handle all of it, that's real freedom.
Of course.
Because then we don't need anything to be any particular way, and we don't need stimulation. It's just like, oh, I can stop running all the time. You know this already.
Oh, no, you can't say it enough.
Yeah.
Can't say it enough.
Yeah, and then towards the end, I was trying to feel into how this practice relates to everything we've been talking about. And, one of the last things you said was the world needs you. And to me, I was like, okay, this is the bridge then between this experience and what we've been talking about. Because I think so many people are at that point of like, okay, the world needs you. But that feeling isn't planted in this soil of being able to stay with what's happening, make a container for it. It's this feeling of urgency, but it's without roots. Do you know what I mean?
That's really well said.
So it's like, if I come from a place of being able to stay with discomfort and whatever, and actually just having like a mild curiosity about it, or just like, this is the way it is, then feeling like the world needs me doesn't come with this like hero complex of like, I need to do the thing and I'm attached to this outcome of thing. And if it doesn't, and if it all burns down, then I'm the worst. And, but it's more just like one foot in front of the other. The world needs me to get up and walk, just like.
And also I belong to this conversation because I belong to this time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really like organic. It's like it's not like tied to personhood and agenda. It's literally like I am part of the motion of that's happening. And yeah, of course, I get up and I walk. I don't sit around being like, which way do I walk? I don't know. I just get up and walk, and hopefully that.
You don't just walk. You
Yeah.
dance.
Exactly. And it's not like I think this is a real upending of the way that we think about our lives is like the world needs me to not fuck it all up. But we're not like, oh, the world just needs me.
Mhm.
What if like the world was okay with me just being here? Like what if not just okay, but like the world was like, oh my God, you're the best just because you exist.
Well,
That gives me energy to do way more than just sit around on my butt. Because now I feel like anything I do is going to be embraced and loved and useful. And that's a much easier place to start making change from.
and it's more authentic as well,
Yeah.
right? Because then what arises isn't what you think you should do, but what, there's that saying of like where what you have to offer meets what the world needs. Like that's
I
where,
love that.
that's,
Bruckner.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think of that, there's a lot of, I follow the Center for Artistic Activism, which I really love. And a big part of what they've been like doing these workshops and teachings, and there's books and everything. It's about like, how do artistic people react to this moment, right? Because there's this feeling of like, I should be doing something concrete, like look at them, they're marching and they're writing petitions and there's lawyers doing this. And I don't know, like me personally, I make music and, Plays makes visual art. And so there's always that feeling of like, I'm not doing enough, So there's this beautiful movement of like, art actually is a completely necessary part of human evolution, of change, of protest. It's just that like when we get squashed into like, here's how it should look, here's how activism looks, or here's how change looks, then we're not showing up authentically, and you're not actually giving your gifts. You're not doing what the world needs of you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been through that so much thinking about that because I went through such a long stage of feeling like somehow that being a meditation teacher was a cop out or something. As if being super interested, passionately interested in supporting everyone's mental health isn't a role that's really important. But it was like the models of activism that I saw, it had to look one kind of way. But that's not my skill set. My skill set is to be able to speak to large groups of people about an accessible way about practice and to feel unthreatening to very different kinds of people.
Yeah.
Whatever. I had to summarize, and that's okay to have that. It's okay to be that. It's okay to be that way. It's like, in fact, it's like an ecosystem. Everyone we want people to have different skills in different areas but there's such a pressure to conform to a certain kind of way in which it needs to look. And,
Well, and I think that's the potential of this practice of opening to ourselves and in turn opening to our enemies, quote unquote, the people who we have edges with, is that we start to allow people and encourage people to fully be themselves and to share their true, authentic gifts with the world.
Yeah.
we're done.
Solved. Problem solved. I think to me, what you just said, I've been using the word ecosystem a lot, and I feel like that's the answer. It's like living in this culture, which is like this like hero mindset and really disjointed, and like even communities are disjointed from each other. There is this pressure to show up as many things because we don't see how everything is important. We're just like, do the most important thing. And I think it's like return to that ecosystem. It kind of like lets all the steam out of your system that feels like it needs to achieve and be better. And so you're beating yourself to be better and you're beating everyone around you to be better. But really, actually, it's like, let's just all show up together in an ecosystem like little worms and bugs.
Yeah.
Do what needs
You
doing.
do the thing that you're good at doing and that you're here to do, and in discussion with the things that need to happen.
Yeah. I feel like the things that need to happen are a lot less daunting then.
Yeah.
So, Cara, did we figure it out?
I think we did. I mean, Jeff didn't support me enough, but other than that, I think we did a great job.
I'm escaping. I'm escaping that fantasy of being on a beach where I was just supporting everybody. I was running around like the umbrella boy.
The umbrella boy. All we can do is just show up and do our best, try to figure it out.
Yeah. I agree.
And have these conversations and support each other. And read Sacred Instructions by Sherry Mitchell, my favorite book, because she's got some great discussion about all of this.
I've listened to about a third of it.
Yeah, I mean, one third is when it really gets going.
Well, I'm saving it for my 7-hour drive to New York next week.
Okay, good. Oh yeah, we have to talk about that. Okay, so
Hey, can I just quickly plug? Can I plug the contemplative semester on this podcast? Oh my god!
Yeah.
How can our listeners practice with you, check you out, see what you're working on doing?
Okay, so I teach these free drop-in classes that are really fun and cute. One's called Meditate Your Face Off, and the other one's called Generosity Class. Oh, actually, there's another one too called Parenting as the Path for parents or people who are like trying to reparent themselves. That's with Jess Maury and Afosu Jones Corte.
Amazing
Afosu,
we had
people.
Afosu on too. We have to get James.
You had him on?
Yeah, he was fabulous.
Oh my god, he's the best.
Yeah.
So yeah, we teach that parenting class together, but these are all free, offered. Usually I try to do them once a week, but when I'm busy, it's like once a month. They're on my website, caralai.org.
What happens in Meditate Your Face Off? Might have to just take that.
What happens in Meditate Your Face Off stays in Meditate Your Face Off.
You have to arrive.
Well, Cara, thank you so much. It was really fun to hang out with you, and we're gonna have to do it again.
Yeah, I'd love that. I want to be the in between you on the couch next time.
With cats on your lap.
Yeah, I want the cat.
And now, join us for the after party at mindbodpod.com, where me and Jeff talk candidly about whatever didn't get said in this week's episode, and chat in the comments with the whole MindBod squad. Don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week, and if you want to support our crazy adventures, consider becoming a paid subscriber on Substack at mindbodpod.com. See you there.